Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. Tonight, we're setting sail into the unknown with 10 true cruise ship horror stories. Encounters that prove sometimes the scariest part of the journey isn't the storm, it's what's lurking on board. Before we begin, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, let's drift into the darkness together. Story number 1. I was halfway through my shift when I noticed the empty davit swinging slightly against the side of the ship. It was a small thing, the kind of movement you'd expect from metal in the ocean wind, but something about it made me stop. I counted quickly under my breath. 1, 2, 3, 4, 9. There should have been 10 lifeboats on that side. I stared harder, leaning over the rail as if looking harder would make it appear again. But no, one was gone. Just gone. My stomach tightened because I knew damn well no alarm had been sounded. At first I thought maybe it had been lowered for maintenance, though that should have been logged and cleared with the officers. I jogged down the deck toward the storage area to check the board. Each lifeboat had a brass marker beside it with a latch for inspection tags. The missing one still had yesterday's tag. No one had touched it since. My fingers hovered over the metal as if it might burn me. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing, but denial doesn't bring a boat back. I whispered to myself, "Where the hell did it go?" I tried to laugh it off when I caught one of the older deckhands passing by. "Hey, did you guys lower a boat earlier?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He frowned and shook his head. "Not today." "Why?" I hesitated, then gestured back. His eyes narrowed as he walked over and counted them himself. The look he gave me after wasn't casual at all. "Stay here," he muttered, and left in a hurry. My chest thumped like a drum. I wasn't sure if I wanted him to confirm it or not. Minutes later, the first officer appeared, followed by 2 crewmen. They counted, whispered among themselves, then quickly ordered me to keep quiet. "Don't say a word to the passengers," one of them said firmly. I nodded, but my brain screamed questions. How could a lifeboat vanish in the middle of open sea without anyone noticing? No alarm, no splash, no sign. My hands were sweating, and I kept wiping them against my trousers, feeling more like a guilty child than a crew member. The rest of the day, I moved like a ghost. Every task felt mechanical, my eyes drifting back to the empty space. The passengers were laughing, drinking, sunbathing. They had no idea. I felt like I was carrying a secret too heavy for my chest. At dinner, I overheard one of the cooks mutter that the officers said it was a miscount, that nothing was missing. But I knew what I saw, and the brass marker on the board backed me up. When we finally docked in Bergen, the order came to sweep all equipment as usual. I volunteered to help, maybe to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy. That's when I found it. The missing boat had been recovered somehow, tied back in place like it had never left, except for one detail. Inside, tucked near the bench, was a child's sweater, folded neatly. Next to it, a small pair of worn shoes. I froze so hard my knees nearly gave. There was no name tag, no lost and found report, nothing. Just silent belongings that didn't belong there. I called the officer over, my voice breaking. He leaned in, saw what I saw, and for a long moment he didn't speak. Finally, he snapped at me to step away. The items were gathered quickly, bagged like evidence, and taken below deck. I wanted to follow, but another crewman blocked me, shaking his head as if warning me off. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the ship felt alive. Every whisper of waves against the hull sounded like voices. My mind replayed the sight of that sweater and those tiny shoes, the way they sat too perfectly, as though someone had placed them there with care. The next day, whispers spread quietly among the crew. One swore he'd heard crying near the stern when no children were outside. Another claimed he saw small, wet footprints near the lifeboats at dawn, though the deck was dry. I didn't know what to believe anymore, except that something was wrong. I wanted to talk, but the officers kept us in line with hard stares. "Nothing happened," they said. "Focus on your duties." Easy words, impossible to follow. 2 nights later, I was assigned late watch. Around midnight, I felt compelled to check the boats again. My flashlight beam cut across the row, steady until it hit the very same lifeboat. My heart sank. It was lowered slightly, the ropes taut as if it had been tugged from below. I rushed forward, hands trembling, whispering to myself not to panic. But when I leaned over the rail, I nearly dropped the light. For just a second, I saw a pale face staring up at me from the boat, a child's face, dripping wet, eyes wide but empty. Then the light flickered, and the boat was empty again. I staggered back, gripping the rail so hard my knuckles burned. I told myself it was exhaustion, imagination. But when I turned, another deckhand had come up behind me, his face white. "You saw it too," he whispered. I couldn't even deny it. We stood there, breathing fast, neither of us brave enough to check again. By morning, the lifeboat was flush against the side, ropes secured tight. When we docked again, the officers ordered new locks installed on every release lever. They worked like nothing had ever happened. But then I heard a rumor that chilled me worse than the sight of that face. The authorities had quietly checked passenger lists. No child had been reported missing, no family complained. Yet the belongings from the boat were real. Worse, some of the crew whispered about a case years earlier, before my time, when a child had slipped overboard unnoticed during rough seas. The body was never recovered. I tried to put it behind me after that voyage. I even convinced myself it was just nerves, that I'd imagined more than was real. But months later, on another run, I passed through Bergen again. I couldn't stop myself from walking down to the harbor alone. There, on a bench near the waterline, I saw a sweater hanging over the wood. Same color, same size. My legs went weak. I blinked, and a mother walked past with her daughter, laughing, normal, alive. The sweater was just clothing, nothing more. But as I walked away, I swore I heard the faint squeak of small shoes behind me, following for a few steps before stopping. That was the last time I served on a cruise. I couldn't carry that weight anymore. The silence, the things we weren't allowed to speak of. People think of cruise ships as joy, luxury, escape. But when I think of them, I see that empty davit, that sweater in the boat, and the face that looked up at me from the dark water. And I know, no matter how hard the officers tried to bury it, the sea remembers what it takes. Even now, when I close my eyes, I feel the sway of that ship under my feet, the rail cold in my grip, and the whisper of waves that sound like a child calling for help. And I wonder, not if, but when, another lifeboat will vanish without a sound, carrying something none of us can explain but all of us will fear. Before we jump into the next story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. We really need your love and support. Story number 2. I was folding laundry in the crew quarters when I first heard about the suit. One of the cabin stewards came rushing down the hallway, clutching a dark bundle in his arms, muttering in Danish under his breath. When he stopped, I caught a glimpse of it. A small formal suit, black jacket, white shirt, and pressed trousers, neatly folded as if it had just come back from dry cleaning. He kept saying it belonged to a boy in cabin 12, but when they'd gone to return it, the family insisted their son had lost it 2 nights earlier, and they had given up hope of finding it. The strange part was that the steward swore he'd seen it hanging perfectly inside another passenger's wardrobe just minutes before. I laughed along with the others at first, thinking it was nothing more than luggage getting mixed up. Things shift around on ships, people borrow, people lie. But then I saw the suit again myself. It appeared in a laundry cart I was pushing to the aft cabins. One moment it wasn't there, the next it was neatly folded atop the pile of towels, as though invisible hands had placed it. I stopped in the middle of the corridor, staring at it, my throat dry. I asked the nearest steward if he had tossed it in. He frowned, shook his head, and backed away as though the thing itself unsettled him. Later that day, the boy's mother asked if we'd recovered the outfit. She seemed relieved when I brought it to her, thanking me like I'd just returned her son's missing passport. The boy looked uncomfortable, though, tugging at her sleeve, refusing to touch the clothes. "I don't want it," he whispered, loud enough for me to hear. His mother scolded him and shoved the bundle into her bag. I walked away, unsettled. The next morning, the suit was back. This time, one of the guests found it in their cabin, carefully laid across the bedspread, though they swore they'd never seen it before. The family of the boy looked shaken when it was returned to them again, and the mother insisted it had been locked in her suitcase all night. I remember watching her open the case in front of the staff. The zipper came down, and it was empty. She went pale, and the boy started crying. By the third day, people whispered openly. Crew said the suit kept wandering. It had been found under pillows, hanging in closets, tucked beneath room service trays. One woman even found it neatly folded inside her handbag when she reached for her lipstick. Each time it was brought back, the boy grew more withdrawn, until he wouldn't leave the cabin at all. His father stormed down to the purser's office, demanding to know why we kept playing tricks. The officers didn't have an answer, but they warned us to keep calm and stop gossiping around passengers. I couldn't help myself. I started watching for it, listening for mentions, and when I saw it again, I felt a strange chill, as though I'd been expecting it. This time it appeared in my own bunk. I returned from dinner to find the small jacket draped neatly across my pillow, the sleeves crossed like folded arms. My chest clenched so tightly I thought I might faint. I touched it, slowly, the fabric cold, stiff and faintly damp, as though it had been pulled from water. I shoved it into a storage locker and snapped the lock shut, furious at whoever was behind this. That night, I dreamed I saw a boy standing at the end of my bunk. His suit clung wet against him, dripping onto the floor. His face was blurred, featureless, and when I tried to move, I felt pinned to the mattress, unable to breathe. I woke, drenched in sweat, the sound of dripping water in my ears. When I opened the locker the next morning, it was empty. The suit was gone. By then, the story spread beyond crew. Passengers traded rumors, some claiming the boy had drowned during a storm years ago, others saying the officers were hiding an accident. The family who owned the suit looked haunted. The mother's eyes were ringed with shadows. The father paced constantly, and the boy refused to speak at all. Still, the suit came back, always folded, always perfect. The night before we reached Aarhus, a passenger from Deck 3 reported finding the suit in her wardrobe. She panicked, called housekeeping, and refused to stay in the cabin. Security carried the clothes back down the hall, and I remember watching the officer's face, pale and drawn, like a man carrying something he couldn't bear to hold. They put it in the storage room with luggage, padlocked the door, and posted a guard outside. Everyone assumed that would be the end of it. But the next morning, chaos erupted. A steward screamed in the corridor, and we rushed to see. The passenger from Deck 3, the same woman who'd last seen the suit, was missing. Her door was locked from the inside, but the cabin was empty. No trace of her remained except for the suit lying on the bed, folded with care. I'll never forget the sight of the boy's mother when she heard. She clutched her son so tightly he yelped. She begged the captain to cancel the trip, to turn the ship around, but we were hours from docking. The officers ordered silence, told us to keep working as though nothing had happened. But the crew walked on eggshells, eyes darting to every door, every cabin. When we finally docked in Aarhus, authorities swarmed the ship. They searched for the missing woman, questioned passengers, checked manifests. No explanation was found. They confiscated the suit, sealed it in a clear evidence bag, and carried it ashore. I thought relief would come then, but instead I felt hollow, like we had only passed a burden onto someone else. I disembarked weeks later, ending my contract early. I couldn't bear to stay. The image of that small, folded suit haunted me more than the missing woman, more than the whispered rumors. What unsettled me most wasn't the vanishing, but the precision. The way it always appeared so neat, so deliberate, like a ritual. Clothes don't fold themselves. Objects don't choose where to appear. And yet, we all saw it happen, again and again. Even now, when I close my wardrobe at night, I half expect to open it and find that black jacket waiting for me, sleeves crossed, fabric damp, as though some unseen child still wants it to be worn. I can't explain it to myself, and I've stopped trying. What I know is this: that suit belonged to more than one boy, more than one passenger. It belonged to the sea itself, and the sea was never finished returning it. That's why I'll never sail again. Story number 3. I shut the valve and waited for the shudder I'd felt 100 times before, the familiar cough of the engine winding down. Instead, the floor under my boots kept trembling. The pipes sang as if nothing had changed, and when I glanced at the gauge, the needle still sat firmly in the green. My chest tightened with the kind of unease you can't reason away. I muttered aloud, No, that's not right," and leaned down to double-check the fuel intake. The line was closed. I even tapped the valve, twisted it again until the steel squeaked. It was sealed. But the ship kept surging ahead. I radioed the bridge, trying to keep my voice steady. "Engine room here. I've cut supply for maintenance, but she's still running. Do you copy?" A pause, then the captain's clipped voice. "You're saying it hasn't shut down?" I answered yes, and silence followed. When he spoke again, it was softer. "Keep monitoring. Don't say anything to the crew yet." That order made my stomach sink deeper than any rough wave. I stood there, gripping the rail, staring at machinery that defied everything I knew. You have to understand, I'd spent half my life around engines. They obeyed rules. Metal, fuel, fire, air. Simple, predictable. But now the ship roared forward with no flame, no burn, no heartbeat I could trace. I could hear it, feel it, smell the faint tang of heat in the air, yet the gauges for consumption were flat, zeros across the board. Curiosity pushed fear back, at least for a while. I climbed down to inspect the cylinders, running my hand across the casings. They weren't hot. Normally, after running at that speed, you'd burn yourself touching them. But they were cold, as if they hadn't worked a single minute. My hand trembled as I drew it back. How could something shake the floor beneath me yet leave no heat behind? One of the younger mechanics, Merrick, came in carrying a toolbox. "You shut it down already?" he asked, blinking at the roaring stillness. He tilted his head, confused by the steady hum. I pulled him close and whispered, "Don't mention this outside. Something's wrong." He laughed nervously, thinking I was joking. But when he bent to check the fuel lines himself, his grin died quick. He looked at me with wide eyes, shaking his head. "That's impossible." Hours passed, and the bridge kept asking for updates. The ship was moving even faster, though every logbook insisted fuel consumption was nil. The captain ordered us to isolate every line, cut every possible feed. We did it. We bled the system dry. By the book, the engine should have been a hunk of dead steel, yet it purred, and the vessel tore through the Baltic like something alive, dragging us toward Gdansk ahead of schedule by almost a full day. Passengers noticed the unusual speed. Some joked about free upgrades, while others whispered uneasily about the way the ship vibrated harder than usual. Crew tried to smile it off, but in the engine room, the air was thick with dread. Marek refused to go near the core after he swore he heard a low voice inside the roar, like someone speaking through the pistons. I told him it was nerves, but deep down I feared he was right. The captain demanded a full shutdown, every switch, every breaker, total blackout. When the order came, we pulled the master lever together. The entire room went dark, silent. For a moment I thought relief might drown the fear. Then slowly, like a pulse returning, the hum rose again. Lights flickered back on even though the breakers were still off. The dials spun to life. The engine revived itself without our touch. I could hear my own breathing louder than the machine for a second, and then it swallowed me up. That night, none of us slept. The crew huddled in the mess, speaking in low tones, like men afraid to wake something. One of the stewards swore he saw waves breaking wrong outside, that the ship was cutting the sea too cleanly. No churn, no wake. I didn't want to believe him, but when I went topside, he was right. We were gliding, slicing water as if we were being pulled rather than propelled. No froth, no churned trail behind us. Just speed. The next morning, the captain called me to his quarters. His face looked older than the day before. He shoved a folder across the desk, old records from another vessel in the company. Same class, same build. 20 years ago, he said, a ship reported an identical malfunction. Same unstoppable engine. They made it back, but... He trailed off. I flipped the pages with sweaty fingers. The report ended abruptly. No conclusion, no repair details, just a stamped warning. Decommission recommended. That vessel had been scrapped, apparently, or so they claimed. I asked him outright, "Do you want me to tell the men?" He shook his head firmly. "They need their wits. Keep them working." But his voice cracked on the last word. I knew he was hiding his own terror under command. When we finally neared Gdansk, the ship didn't slow. No matter what we tried, anchors, reverse thrusters, nothing caught. The harbor authorities were radioing, frantic, telling us to reduce speed, but we had no control. The captain stood pale on the bridge, clutching the wheel, though it did nothing. Somehow, at the very last moment, just before collision, the vessel eased itself into port, drifting gently as though mocking us. My knees nearly gave way. After passengers disembarked, all smiles about record time, the crew was ordered to stay. Inspectors boarded. They pored over logs, tapped the machinery, shook their heads. No explanation. Finally, one older inspector pulled me aside. His eyes were tired. "It's not the first case," he whispered. "The sea has ways of moving what it wants." I asked what that meant, but he walked away without another word. That night, when the docks were quiet, I snuck back to the engine room alone. I had to face it. The ship was docked, tied firm, yet the hum was still there, faint but steady, like a heartbeat waiting to rise again. I pressed my ear against the cold steel. For a moment, I swore I heard not an engine, but a chorus of distant breaths, countless and layered, pushing in rhythm. My chest seized, and I stumbled back, clutching the rail. The next morning, the company announced a refit. We were dismissed. Official word, mechanical anomaly under review. But I couldn't shake what I felt. I left the sea after that, took jobs on land, told myself it was over. Yet even now, when trucks rumble past my flat, I sometimes hear that same hum beneath the noise. And I know it isn't imagination. Because in my dreams, I'm always back in that engine room, hand on the valve, sealing it shut while the ship surges on, unstoppable, as though something deeper than mechanics has claimed it. And I can't help but believe it wasn't us powering that ship at all. It was something older, something that carried us because it chose to, something that will one day choose again. That's why I don't talk about cruises with friends anymore. People imagine luxury, buffets, laughter on deck. I only picture steel that moves without fire, cold machinery that runs without fuel, and the helpless truth I learned in 1996. Once the sea decides to carry you, there's nothing you can do to stop it. Story number 4. I caught myself laying out one more plate of food than I should have. It wasn't the first time either. That evening in the galley, while balancing trays for the dining staff, I realized my hand had moved automatically, as if following some order I hadn't spoken aloud. 11 plates of salmon, 11 diners, but in front of me sat 12 plates, garnished identically. My stomach tightened, and I cursed under my breath. Maybe I'd miscounted. I scraped the extra into the disposal, told myself I was tired, and pushed through the service. But when the steward returned with his trays, he frowned at me. "Missing one," he said. I opened my mouth to argue, but the numbers didn't lie. He had 12 passengers listed for that order. Later, when I checked the meal log, my signature was there for 12 plates, clear and bold, like I'd written it myself minutes before. I rubbed my eyes. I remembered only 11, but the record disagreed. I told myself I was distracted, maybe mixing tables, but the knot in my chest didn't loosen. The next morning, breakfast service was a blur until I looked down and saw it again. One more plate of eggs than needed. I stopped, checked the ticket. 8 plates, 9 dishes steaming in front of me. My hand was trembling as I lifted the extra away, only for the steward to arrive and scold me for missing one order. He held the slip in my face. 9 meals. My heart thudded. By the 3rd day, I couldn't pretend anymore. It was happening at every service. I'd swear the order was for a certain number, but the slips always proved me wrong, always one more than I recalled. It wasn't just me, either. Other chefs teased me for looking pale, but none of them said anything about the counts being off. They didn't see it. Or maybe they didn't want to. I started double-checking every ticket before cooking. Still, the plates lined up wrong, as if invisible hands guided mine. Each time, the missing dish was the same. Plain, simple, unadorned. Bread, meat, no garnish, like something you'd prepare for someone who didn't want to be noticed. I kept my mouth shut until the chief steward asked me to review the logs. He thought maybe I was mixing up orders. When he pulled the book down, I saw the neat handwriting, mine, over and over. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, always one more serving than I remembered. The steward flipped through pages and said, "Consistent, nothing unusual." I wanted to scream. The ink was too clean, too perfect, like it wasn't written in real time but filled in later. He clapped my shoulder and left. I stood there staring at my own signature until I felt dizzy. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bunk, replaying the days in my head, trying to find where the extra plate went. No one ever returned it. No steward complained of leftovers. It was always delivered somewhere. I thought about sneaking after them, but the galley was chaos during service, and I couldn't risk being caught shirking. Still, the not knowing chewed at me. On the 5th night, I made a decision. I plated the extra meal, and instead of handing it off, I slipped it under my station, watching the steward leave with the rest. My heart raced as I waited for someone to ask where the missing dish was. but no one did. The service ended. I thought I'd beaten it. When I finally lifted the plate to dump it, the food was gone. The plate sat empty, knife and fork used, crumbs scattered. My throat closed up. I hadn't left my station all night. No one had touched it. I grabbed the plate and hurled it into the sink, the crash echoing louder than I intended. The others laughed, asked if I was drunk. I muttered something about slippery hands, but inside I was shaking so hard I could barely hold a knife. The next day, I tried again, hiding the extra meal. This time I placed it inside the cold storage, locked the latch. Hours later, I opened it to check. The food was gone, the plate licked clean. A faint smell of salt lingered in the air, like seawater. My stomach turned. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? I barely believed it myself. By then I couldn't eat. My appetite was gone, replaced by a gnawing dread that followed me everywhere. I began noticing things I had ignored before. The way certain corridors felt colder. How some cabins stayed dark even when passengers should have been inside. How the steward avoided eye contact when delivering that extra meal. Once, I asked him directly, "Who gets the last plate?" He blinked, confused, then said, "Same as always." His voice was flat, rehearsed, like he didn't know the answer but had to give one anyway. When we docked in Zeebrugge, I thought maybe I'd get relief. But the logs told another story. The record showed I'd been serving one extra passenger every single day for the past week. Same cabin number, 117B. I froze because I knew that section of the ship. It had been closed off since refurbishment. No one was supposed to stay there. My hands went clammy as I asked the steward casually if 117B had been reopened. He looked at me like I'd spoken nonsense. "That cabin doesn't exist anymore," he said. I didn't want to, but I had to see it. That evening, when the ship was quieter, I walked the narrow passage down toward where 117B should have been. My footsteps echoed, and each step made me feel smaller, like I was walking into a throat that would swallow me whole. The numbers on the doors stopped at 115. Then a blank section of wall. No door, no handle, just seamless steel paneling. But when I pressed my palm against it, it felt warmer than the air around me, like something behind it was alive. I backed away, my breath ragged when I heard the sound. A fork clinking against a plate. Slow, deliberate. My skin crawled. I wanted to run, but my legs locked. I stood frozen until the noise stopped. Then I turned and forced myself to walk back, each step heavier than the last. After that night, I couldn't work properly. My hands shook too much, my thoughts wandered. I kept imagining who was eating those meals. What kind of passenger didn't need to be listed, didn't need to show their face. On the 7th day, I broke. I cornered the steward again and demanded to know where the plates went. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Cabin 117B." His lips trembled like he hadn't meant to say it. I didn't finish my shift. I walked straight to the officers and told them everything. They stared at me like I was mad, but one of them finally agreed to check, maybe to shut me up. We walked together to the sealed corridor. I expected blank metal, but that night the door was there. Painted, numbered 117B, polished like it had always been part of the ship. The officer frowned, jotted something, and knocked. No reply. He used his master key. Inside, the cabin looked normal. A bed neatly made, a desk, curtains drawn. But on the desk sat a plate. Empty, smeared with the last traces of food. My food. The officer asked if I'd planted it, his tone sharp. I swore I hadn't. He ordered me out, muttering about checking records. I left shaking, bile in my throat. I wanted to scream that I wasn't crazy, that I knew what I'd seen. The next morning, the cabin was gone again. The corridor blank, smooth metal like before. The officer wouldn't meet my eyes. He told me to focus on my duties, that there was nothing unusual. But that night, another plate disappeared. The logs showed my signature again. I didn't last much longer on that ship. When the contract ended, I left, told myself I was done with the sea. But the memory won't leave. Sometimes when I eat alone at home, I feel the weight of another presence across the table. I'll glance up, expecting to see someone chewing silently, eyes fixed on me. There's never anyone there, but the plate in front of me feels heavier than it should, as if it's not just mine. I know now that the sea doesn't give everything back. Some passengers never check in, never check out, but they still demand their meals, their place among the living, and I was the one who fed them. That truth has eaten more of me than any hunger ever could. Which story setting scared you the most? Let me know in the comments. Story number 5. I was on my 3rd week working the lower decks when the sound first reached me. I had been sent down to the cargo hold with 2 others to check on some rattling containers. Nothing unusual, but as we pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside, I froze. A soft tune drifted through the air, slow and delicate, like someone humming a lullaby. The melody was so clear it almost felt like it was right behind me, and I caught myself turning my head, expecting to see someone standing there. But no one was. My skin prickled, and I whispered to the others, asking if they heard it too. One of them, Luca, cursed under his breath and said, "Yeah, I hear it. Who the hell is down here?" We moved further in, weaving between the stacked crates and secured pallets, our boots clanging against the steel. The sound grew sharper, not louder exactly, but focused, pulling us toward the far wall. Every step made the hair on my arms rise. The humming wasn't cheerful, not quite. It dragged on certain notes, stretching them into something almost mournful. When we reached the end of the aisle, we found them. Toys, small wooden blocks, a stuffed rabbit, a doll with missing hair, all arranged in a neat little circle on the floor as though a child had just finished playing and gone to bed. None of us spoke for a moment. We just stared, the lullaby fading until all I could hear was my own pulse hammering in my ears. Luca finally broke the silence. "Who left this here?" His voice cracked more than he wanted it to. We checked the manifest later, and there were no children listed as being anywhere near cargo. The hold was strictly off-limits to passengers. We cleared the area, reported what we saw, and got told by the officer that it was probably a prank or something misplaced. "Clean it up and move on," he said, dismissive. But even as I bent to scoop the toys into a sack, I swore I felt a breeze brush against my neck, like someone exhaled softly right behind me. The next few nights, more crew mentioned it in hushed voices. The lullaby kept coming back, always faint, always when the ship was quietest. A couple of times I went down alone, just to prove to myself it was nothing. Each time I would stand in the silence, waiting until I felt my chest tighten with dread. Sometimes I heard it, sometimes I didn't. But even when there was nothing, the memory of that melody gnawed at me. I began humming it unconsciously when I worked, until Luca snapped at me, telling me to stop. "Don't bring it up here," he said sharply, like he was scared the tune itself could summon it. Then it happened. One morning, a frantic announcement called for all available crew to assist in searching the ship. A child had gone missing. She'd been last seen with her parents near the dining hall, and then she was just gone. The family was panicked, passengers restless, everyone murmuring. We swept the decks, the corridors, everywhere. Hours passed. Nothing. I already knew where I'd end up checking, though I dreaded it. When they sent us back down to the cargo hold, my stomach turned. The door groaned open, and there it was. The circle of toys again, this time with an addition, a tiny pair of red shoes set neatly side by side. I recognized them instantly from the morning when the little girl had walked past me holding her mother's hand. My knees nearly buckled. I grabbed Luca's arm, whispering, "It's her. Those are hers." He swallowed hard, shaking his head, but he couldn't deny it. We tore through the hold, checking every corner, but there was no child, no stowaway, no explanation, just the faint drift of that same lullaby winding through the metal walls like smoke. The officers locked the place down after that. Security sealed the hold, told the parents they were doing everything possible. But the child was never found. And still, the melody kept surfacing, winding its way into the corridors late at night. Some passengers started whispering that the ship was cursed. Others claimed they saw a little figure darting through the hallways, always just out of reach. One woman swore she woke in the night to see a girl standing by her bed, humming to herself before vanishing. I tried to hold myself together, but guilt gnawed at me. I kept seeing those red shoes in my mind, clean and perfectly placed, as though the girl hadn't been dragged or hurt, but chosen. That thought terrified me even more. Whoever or whatever was in that hold wasn't sloppy. It was deliberate. It wanted her. On the last night before docking in KOTOR, I couldn't sleep. I kept tossing in my bunk, the tune replaying in my head until I couldn't take it anymore. I slipped out against every order and made my way down to the hold. My key turned in the lock with a heavy click. Inside, the air felt colder, heavier. I moved carefully between the crates, my flashlight beam shaking in my hand. The toys were there again, but now the circle was wider. Blocks, dolls, marbles, and in the very center a single stuffed bear propped upright. My throat closed. I stepped forward, and the humming began, so close it could have been in my ear. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice breaking. "Please, just give her back." For a second, I swore I heard a giggle, soft and fleeting. Then the bear toppled over by itself, landing face down. I bolted. I don't remember climbing the stairs or slamming the door shut, but I remember Luca finding me shaking in the hallway, my face pale as death. I couldn't speak. All I could do was point back toward that door. When we finally docked, the family was escorted off, broken and empty. They had no daughter anymore and no answers. The authorities came aboard, questioned everyone, searched every inch. Nothing. They dismissed the crew's talk of songs and toys as nonsense, stress-induced imagination. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. I left the ship at the end of that contract and never signed on again. Even now, years later, when I think back, it isn't the missing child's face that haunts me most. It's the sound, that endless, lilting lullaby that threads its way through my memory. Sometimes, when my apartment is dead quiet, I catch myself hearing it again, faint but distinct, like it's carried across the sea straight into my walls. And the worst part, the part I've never told anyone until now, is that last night in the cargo hold, when the bear fell and I fled, I didn't just hear humming. I heard a small voice whisper my name, not once, twice, soft, sweet, like a promise. And I knew then that the girl wasn't lost. She was with whatever waits in those shadows, and it knew me too. Story number 6. I caught sight of him on my very first performance of the cruise, sitting there in the front row, carnival mask covering his entire face. It wasn't the kind of playful half mask people wear at masquerades. No, this one was full, hard, and painted in deep colors that seemed deliberately unsettling. I laughed it off at first, thinking maybe it was just a tourist with a quirky sense of humor, but as I sang, I couldn't shake the feeling of his eyes, invisible behind the holes, following me without blinking. Every time I moved across the stage, I knew his gaze was fixed. I told myself not to make a big deal of it. After all, cruises attract all kinds. But when I came back the next evening, there he was again. Same seat, same mask. No movement, no clapping, just watching. The rest of the audience cheered, smiled. Some even stood up for applause, but not him. He just sat there, motionless. A chill climbed up my spine, and I had to force myself to keep smiling. The mask wasn't playful anymore. It was invasive, like someone trespassing inside my own performance. By the third night, I made excuses in my head. Maybe he was a wealthy eccentric who'd booked a seat for the whole week. Maybe he was shy, or had scars, or a medical condition that made him cover up. But deep down, I felt something was off. I tested myself during the performance, letting my gaze linger longer than usual on the audience. Sure enough, he was there, leaning slightly forward this time, hands resting on his knees, as if he wanted to be closer. The mask seemed darker under the lights, and I felt myself stumbling over a lyric I'd sung 1,000 times. My throat closed up until I had to swallow hard to keep from choking. Backstage, I mentioned it to one of the dancers, half joking, half begging for reassurance. She shrugged, told me she hadn't noticed anyone unusual. When I insisted, she said, "You know, sometimes the lights play tricks on you. Maybe it's just nerves." I smiled, but inside I wanted to scream. I wasn't nervous. I knew what I saw. I knew how real it felt. The fourth night broke me. Midway through my set, I risked a longer glance. The mask was there, of course, but this time the head tilted in perfect sync with my movements, like a predator following prey. I faltered so badly that I missed an entire beat. The pianist glanced at me in confusion, and I forced myself back into rhythm, cheeks burning with humiliation. I wanted to stop, to run off stage, but my professionalism anchored me there. The mask stayed still, unbothered, patient. Later, when I went up to the deck to breathe, I convinced myself to confront it. If he came back tomorrow, I would ask him directly who he was and why he kept showing up. It wasn't courage so much as desperation. I couldn't perform like this, not with that weight pressing on my chest. That night I barely slept, turning over the image of that blank stare. When the next show came, I walked out already, scanning the crowd, and there he was. Same spot, same mask. My knees wobbled. But I made myself finish the performance, sweat dripping down my back as I counted down the minutes. When the curtain fell, I bolted through the side aisle before the crowd dispersed. I reached the front row within seconds, my heart pounding. The seat was empty. No mask, no man. Just a clean chair, as if no one had ever sat there. I asked the usher, who'd been stationed nearby all evening, "Where did the man in the mask go?" He looked confused. "What man?" My voice shook as I pressed him, but he swore he hadn't seen anyone wearing a mask. He said the front row had been filled with families and an elderly couple. My head spun so violently I thought I might collapse. I stormed backstage and asked around. Everyone denied seeing him. The next day, I couldn't take it anymore. I went to the purser's desk, trembling, and asked to check the passenger manifest. I lied, saying I needed to thank a passenger who'd been coming to my shows. I described the mask, the posture, the strange behavior. The staff member frowned and scrolled through the list. No one matched. He checked again, more carefully, and then looked up at me, his voice lower. "Ma'am?" Or, "Sorry, miss. There's no passenger like that. Are you sure you're not mistaken?" I forced a smile and walked away, but my whole body buzzed with the certainty that I was not mistaken. That night, I nearly refused to perform. My hands shook as I did my makeup, and I told myself this would be the last time. I couldn't keep doing this. But when I stepped onto the stage, I scanned the crowd and froze. The masked figure was back, front row, right in the middle. My throat nearly closed with panic, but I forced out the first note. My eyes watered as I sang, but I kept my focus sharp, determined to keep him in my sight. Midway through the set, something horrifying happened. The mask leaned forward and tapped its fingers on its knees, in rhythm with the music. My stomach dropped. He wasn't just watching anymore. He was participating. I sang faster, desperate to finish, but the mask leaned back calmly, never breaking rhythm. When the final applause came, my knees almost gave way. I didn't wait for the curtain call. I ran straight off stage, gasping for breath. I couldn't let it go anymore. I grabbed 2 security officers and demanded they check the front row. They humored me, walking out into the theater. When they returned, their faces were blank. "There's no one there, just regular guests." I shouted, begged them to believe me, but they just nodded politely, clearly chalking me up to stress. The final night of the cruise came. I told myself I wouldn't perform. I told myself I'd lock my door and wait until we docked in Hobart. But something deeper drove me back on stage, like I had to see this through. When I stepped out, the front row was already filled. And in the center, the mask waited. My chest heaved. This time he tilted his head slowly side to side, as though mocking my nerves. I felt rage rising in me, stronger than fear. I sang every note perfectly, locking eyes with those black hollows. For the first time, I didn't falter. I poured my voice out like a challenge, daring him to move, daring him to do anything. And as the last note echoed, the mask tilted once more, then stilled. My hands shook as the curtain fell. When we docked the next morning, I bolted off the ship the moment clearance was given. I didn't care about luggage or formalities. I needed solid ground. But as I passed through the terminal, I noticed security officers clustered around a clipboard, whispering. I asked one of them what was going on. He muttered something about a discrepancy on the manifest. I pressed, and he hesitated before saying, "We had 1 extra name appear during disembarkation. No photo, no details, just an empty entry." I walked away, heart slamming against my ribs. I never took another cruise job again. I stuck to small venues on land where I could see every face clearly. And yet, sometimes when I step on stage, I scan the audience and swear I see that mask in the corner of my vision. I never look directly anymore. I can't. Because deep down, I know if I ever lock eyes again, I might not come back from it. That mask wasn't just a passenger. It wasn't just my imagination. It was something waiting, watching, feeding off every note I sang. And the worst part? It knows my face now, even if I never saw his. Story number 7. I had been rushing to meet the deadline for print orders when the first roll came through. I still remember the chemical sting in my nose, the hum of the machine, the rhythm I had done hundreds of times before. But when the images appeared, I froze. Hallway after hallway, empty and bare, yet in every single frame, there was a figure. It was me. My own back, my hair tied up the way I wore it, my uniform shirt, even the tilt of my shoulders. I stared at those prints, my hands trembling so much I nearly dropped them onto the wet floor. I told myself it had to be a trick of reflection, or maybe one of the passengers had taken a joke photo of me from behind, and it had somehow gotten mixed up. But that didn't make sense. These shots weren't candid snapshots. They were long corridors with perfect symmetry, and in every single one, I was at the center, walking away, smaller in each successive photo as if whoever took them had followed me, frame by frame. My throat felt dry. I glanced around the dark room, suddenly hyper-aware of how alone I was, the low red glow pressing down on me like a warning. I gathered the prints and hurried out, almost running into Lars, the print technician. He frowned, asked what was wrong, but I shoved the stack at him. "Look," I whispered. His face tightened as he flipped through the shots. "Strange," he muttered, trying to sound casual, though I could see the unease in his eyes. "Could be a light issue, or overlapping exposure." I shook my head violently. "That's me. Someone took these of me." He opened his mouth but stopped, like he didn't want to say the wrong thing. Finally, he handed them back. "Maybe you should talk to the purser. Check which passenger submitted the roll." So I did. I checked the envelope. Neat handwriting, a cabin number, 332. I went there the next morning, heart hammering, rehearsing what to say. But when I knocked, the door swung open to reveal a cabin stripped bare. No luggage, no clothes, no toothbrush on the sink, just spotless emptiness. My stomach dropped. I asked the steward, and he swore no one had ever been assigned to that room for this voyage. I knew I was holding their envelope, though. I had processed their order. The handwriting was real. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bunk, hearing the creaks and groans of the ship. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my own back, walking away, smaller and smaller, as if into a tunnel. I kept thinking, if I was in those photos, then someone was right behind me. Who? When? I didn't remember anyone taking my picture. And why only my back, never my face? I got up in the dark, paced the narrow cabin, feeling caged. My chest tightened with dread I couldn't explain. The following day, I tried to distract myself with other work. Families wanted portraits, couples posed on the deck, kids grinned with ice cream dripping down their chins. I forced a smile, snapped the shots, but my eyes flicked constantly, to the edges of frames, searching. At one point, I thought I saw her again. Me, in the background of a family photo. My back, walking away. When I checked the preview, nothing was there. Just normal. My pulse hammered anyway. I decided I needed to confront the negatives themselves. I pulled the roll back from the archive box, hands clammy. Frame after frame confirmed what I'd already seen. My outline, my hair, my posture. It wasn't a trick of light. It wasn't exposure damage. It was me. And the strangest part? Each shot was taken at the same eye level I would shoot at, as though the photographer stood where I would stand, holding the same camera, seeing the world through my eyes. That evening, Lars found me staring blankly at the strips. He sighed, put a hand on my shoulder. "You're overworked. Take a night off." I snapped at him, sharper than I meant. "Don't you see? Someone is following me. They're taking these when I'm not looking. They're inside the staff corridors." His face softened, but his silence was worse than denial. He didn't believe me, not really. Or maybe he did, and he was afraid to admit it. Later that night, while crossing one of those same long hallways, I felt it. The sensation of being watched, of someone a few steps behind. I whipped around. Nothing. Just the silent stretch of carpet, the repeating doors. I walked faster, my heartbeat matching my footsteps. Then came the click. A soft shutter sound, unmistakable. I spun again, adrenaline burning through me. The hallway was still empty, but I could swear the air shimmered, as if someone had just stepped into a room and closed the door. I barely slept. My dreams were worse. Me, always walking, always away from something, never able to turn back. By morning, I was shaking with exhaustion. I decided to destroy the photos. Maybe that would break whatever hold they had. I locked myself in the dark room, pulled the prints from their envelope, and ripped them in half again and again until the pieces lay scattered like fallen leaves. I felt relief, raw and shaky, like I had finally beaten something. But the relief lasted less than a day. The next time I developed a passenger's role, they appeared again. My back, in a corridor, this time closer, as if whoever was behind me had gained ground. My stomach flipped, and I nearly vomited on the prints. I stuffed them in my bag, too scared to show anyone. It wasn't just photographs now. It was a countdown, a pursuit. The ship drew nearer to Visby, our stop before the end of the voyage. I told myself, just get through it. Dock, disembark, and I'll quit this job for good. That night, unable to rest, I walked the deck. The sea was calm, the horizon pale. For a moment, I felt silly, paranoid, like I'd built a monster out of nothing. Then, in the reflection of the glass door, I saw her. My own back, walking past me inside the lounge, moving without sound. My breath caught, and when I spun, the room was empty. I stumbled to my cabin, heart wild, tears burning my eyes. I wanted to scream, but I was terrified someone would hear and lock me away for being unstable. I sat on my bed until dawn, gripping my camera like a weapon. At first light, I forced myself to check one last roll, trembling so hard I could barely load it. The photos came through. Hallway. Hallway. My back. Closer now, filling the frame. And then the last shot, me, turning my head just slightly, enough to show the curve of my cheek, enough to prove it wasn't some trick. It was me, but not me. Something snapped inside. I couldn't stay. I left the darkroom in a panic, prints clutched to my chest. The ship was already nearing Visby's port. I decided I'd disembark the moment we docked. No explanations. No goodbyes. As I walked toward the exit decks, I felt lightheaded, as though my body wasn't fully mine. People brushed past, but their faces blurred. My steps felt automatic. When we arrived, passengers bustled down the gangway. I followed, dizzy but determined. But halfway across, I heard it again. The shutter click. I whipped around, expecting a crowd. Instead, I saw myself standing at the top of the gangway, holding a camera, watching me. My throat seized, and before I could cry out, someone jostled me forward, and I stumbled onto the dock. When I looked back, there was nothing. No second me, no camera, just crew ushering people along. I dropped the photos right there on the wet planks, unable to carry them another step. And when I tried to explain later, the staff claimed I'd never been assigned to process that order, that cabin 332 didn't exist, that no such photos were logged. I never set foot on a cruise ship again. I left the job, moved far inland, away from ports and harbors. But the worst part isn't what happened then. It's now. Sometimes when I walk down my apartment hallway, I hear it. That faint, mechanical click, right behind me. And once, just once, I developed a roll of film from my own camera. I told myself I wouldn't look, but I did. Every frame was empty, just the hallway outside my door. And in every shot, my own back was there, walking away. Story number 8. I was doing my nightly round when I noticed it, tucked between 2 storage rooms on deck 4. A door, thick steel, edges blackened like someone had taken a torch to it. Welds sealed it tight all the way around, rough and uneven, not the clean finish you'd expect on a ship built with precision. I slowed, frowning, because I'd walked this corridor 100 times and never really looked at that spot. My flashlight caught the surface, and I saw faint scratches at chest height, like someone had dragged their nails over the paint before it was sealed. For a moment, I thought maybe it was just old wear. Still, I couldn't shake the chill that went down my spine. Later that night, lying in my bunk, I heard it. A sound that didn't fit with the usual creaks and hums of the ship. 3 slow knocks, steady, spaced out like someone on the other side was waiting for me to notice. I sat up instantly, heart hammering, because I knew exactly where it had come from. That welded door. At first, I tried convincing myself I'd imagined it, that it was pipes expanding, or someone dropping something heavy. But when it came again, louder this time, the denial drained away. I didn't sleep a second. By morning, I couldn't keep quiet. I asked Hari, another deckhand, if he knew about the sealed door. He gave me this look, sharp, like I'd stepped into forbidden territory. "Don't touch it," he muttered, avoiding my eyes. I pressed him, but he only shook his head and walked off. That reaction told me more than words could. Something about that door was not supposed to be talked about. I started watching it more closely during shifts. Some nights I heard dragging noises, like furniture being pulled across a floor. Other times, faint murmurs, too soft to catch the words, but definitely human. I felt myself slipping into obsession. I'd pause in front of it, listening, palms damp, afraid and yet desperate to understand. My rational mind kept fighting. Ships don't have hidden corridors, everything is mapped out. I even checked the blueprints in the maintenance office when no one was around. On deck 4, the space where that door sat was marked as solid bulkhead. No room, no corridor, nothing but reinforced steel. Yet I knew with certainty that something was behind it. One night, I couldn't resist anymore. I brought a hammer and small chisel after my shift, hands trembling as I knelt in front of the welds. My mind screamed at me to stop, but my body kept moving. I chipped at the seam for nearly an hour, sweat pouring, every strike echoing down the empty corridor. At one point, I froze, because I thought I heard breathing on the other side. Slow, calm, patient. I held my breath, ear pressed to the cold steel, and I swear I felt a faint vibration under my cheek, like someone resting theirs against the opposite side. That was the first time I nearly ran, but curiosity kept me kneeling there like a fool. Days later, the order came down from the chief engineer. An inspection team was to open the sealed door. No explanation, no reason given, just a command. We gathered, 6 of us, as torches cut through the welds I'd already weakened. Sparks lit the corridor, and I caught myself biting the inside of my cheek so hard I drew blood. The smell of burning metal filled the air, but underneath it, faint, there was another smell. Damp, stale, almost earthy, like soil that hadn't seen light in years. When the last weld gave, the door creaked inward with an awful groan. We all leaned forward to see. What we found didn't make sense. A narrow corridor stretched ahead, dim, walls painted in the same color as the rest of the ship, but the floor sloped ever so slightly downward, like it led deeper into the vessel. It wasn't on the maps, yet here it was, solid and real. The chief barked for 2 of us to go in. My name was called first. My legs felt like stone, but I moved, because refusing wasn't an option. The air inside was colder, heavier. Each step echoed too loud, like the corridor was amplifying sound. I shined my light along the walls and noticed something that made my stomach twist. Handprints. Small, childlike, smeared in faint brown stains that looked too much like old dried blood. I told myself it was rust, but even then I knew I was lying. Hari followed close behind me, muttering prayers under his breath. We reached the end after maybe 20 meters, only to find another door. This one wasn't welded, just closed. I turned the handle. It opened without resistance. The room beyond was small, maybe the size of a storage closet. Inside, 3 wooden chairs stood in a circle. On each chair sat a neatly folded set of clothes, aged and discolored but unmistakably belonging to children. Next to the clothes, small shoes, arranged side by side. The smell of earth was stronger here, almost choking. My throat tightened, and I felt dizzy, lightheaded, like I was intruding somewhere sacred and wrong. Hari tugged my sleeve. "We shouldn't be here," he whispered, eyes wide with fear. I agreed. We backed out quickly, nearly tripping over each other. The officers sealed the door again the next morning, welding it shut with fresh orders that no one speak of what was found. The official report would say it was an unused storage compartment, nothing of concern. But I couldn't shake the image of those folded clothes, untouched for who knew how many years. And the handprints, too many to count, pressed into the walls like a gallery of silent pleas. I tried to put it behind me, but the ship wouldn't let me. A week later, during a night shift, I heard laughter, faint and high-pitched, echoing down deck 4. I spun around, but the corridor was empty. My chest tightened as the sound drew me back toward that sealed door. The laughter turned into knocking, rhythmic and deliberate. I covered my ears, but I could still feel it reverberate in my chest, inside my bones. I wanted to scream, but I knew if I did, others might hear and realize what I had, that the welds didn't silence anything. Not long after, passengers began reporting strange occurrences. A woman claimed she'd seen a little girl running down the corridor, only for the child to vanish around a corner. A man said he'd heard voices through the ventilation at night. Each report was quietly dismissed, written off as imagination, alcohol, or fatigue. But I knew the truth. The ship was carrying something it could never put ashore. When we finally docked in Turku, I considered leaving, breaking my contract, walking away. But fear bound me just as much as duty. Fear that if I left, I'd never outrun what I'd seen. That door, that corridor would stay with me no matter where I went. The night before disembarking, I went one last time. Alone. I stood in front of the welded steel, heart pounding, and whispered, "What do you want?" The answer came, faint but unmistakable. Knocks. 3 of them, steady like the very first night. Only this time, after the last knock, I heard a voice, a child's voice, soft and close to the metal, saying my name. My legs gave out, and I slumped against the opposite wall, shaking. I hadn't told anyone my route, my shift, not even my full name to the passengers. Yet the voice knew. I never signed another contract after that voyage. I left the sea behind, but not the memory. Even now, when I close my eyes, I see that narrow corridor leading nowhere, the folded clothes on the chairs, the handprints lining the walls. And sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake to the sound of knocking, faint but certain, as though the sea has followed me onto land. That's why I don't tell this story often, not because I fear being called mad, but because speaking it aloud makes it real again. And I know, as sure as I'm sitting here, that if I ever step foot on another ship, the door will be waiting, welded shut, patient, with someone on the other side calling for me to open it once more. Story number 9. I was checking boarding tags at the gangway when her name came up twice. The system we used back then wasn't digital, it was a clipboard and ink. But we were precise. Each ticket was torn, stamped, and crossed out in sequence. So when I saw the same surname, same ticket number, same signature marked twice, I froze with the pencil in my hand. At first, I thought it was my mistake. Maybe I'd miscopied a line or let my eyes drift. But when I looked again, it was there in plain handwriting. 2 entries, 5 minutes apart, both signed. I swallowed, glanced at the steward beside me, and didn't say a word. Later, when the ship was moving out of La Spezia, the purser called me down. He tapped the sheet, eyebrows low, and asked, "Why did you allow this?" I told him I didn't. He asked if I'd seen her. I said yes, a blonde tourist, mid-30s, carrying a small red suitcase. He smirked as if that described half the passengers on board. Then he said the thing that made my stomach twist. "There are 2 cabins assigned under her name, both occupied." I was ordered to check. When I knocked on the first cabin, A woman opened the door immediately. She smiled, polite, with that tired glow travelers wear after boarding. I asked if she was comfortable, if she needed anything. She thanked me in English, her accent crisp but gentle, and I saw the suitcase at her feet, red with a leather strap. Nothing unusual, except I knew her name had already been ticked once before. I went 2 decks down to the other cabin. When I rapped my knuckles against the door, there was no sound at first. Then, slowly, the knob turned. The same woman stood there. Same face, same hair tied neatly, same tired smile. The difference was she didn't speak. She looked at me as if waiting for me to provide the words. Behind her, the cabin was spotless. No open bags, no sign of life. She simply stared, lips pressed lightly together, eyes holding mine with a weight that felt deliberate. I managed to stammer a greeting, but she only nodded once and closed the door. I returned to the purser, trembling. I told him what I saw, but he dismissed it. "Maybe a sister, maybe an error in paperwork," he said. I wanted to argue, but the certainty in his voice shut me down. I spent the rest of the night replaying the identical faces in my head, unable to decide which version of her was the real one. On the second day, I passed the first cabin again. She waved at me cheerfully, wearing a light summer dress, the red suitcase now tucked neatly under her bunk. She looked alive, vibrant, every bit a normal passenger. When I found an excuse to walk past the second cabin, my heart pounded. She was standing in the doorway already, as if waiting for me. The same dress, the same hair, but no suitcase, no personal touch. And her silence stretched longer this time. I whispered, "Can I help you?" She tilted her head slowly, like a bird studying something fragile. Then she closed, the door without a sound. By the third night, I was unraveling. I asked a colleague if he'd noticed anything unusual. He laughed and told me to stop drinking on shift. But I hadn't touched a drop. That evening, I followed her, the first one, as she strolled the promenade deck. She laughed with other passengers, ordered wine at dinner, clinked glasses with strangers. She was social, warm, unmistakably real. Yet when I tried to watch longer, my eyes blurred, as if focusing on her too long made my vision betray me. I couldn't resist checking the second cabin again. This time I heard movement inside before I knocked. The door opened before I touched it. She was waiting, closer than ever, her eyes level with mine. And in her silence, I heard something worse than words, the sound of breathing, shallow, deliberate, almost like she was mimicking mine. I felt heat rise in my chest and stumbled back. She didn't follow, but I sensed she could. On the fourth day, the purser finally admitted the mistake was real. He called me privately and showed me the manifests again. Both cabins were registered under the same ticket, the same name, but with slightly different signatures. One with a flourish at the end, one without. He wanted me to handle it quietly. No need to alarm paying guests. I asked what he meant by handle it. He didn't answer, just stared at me with tired authority. That night, everything broke. I saw the first woman again at the lounge, laughing. When I excused myself to leave, I nearly collided with the other at the stairwell. She stood perfectly still, watching me. My heart leapt so violently I gripped the rail to steady myself. Her lips parted for the first time, and I heard a dry whisper. "Which one?" I wanted to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. She turned and walked down the corridor without a sound. I couldn't sleep. My bunk felt like a coffin. I decided to confront both of them, to end this madness. I went to the lively one's cabin first. I knocked, and she opened, cheerful as ever. Behind her, I saw photographs spread on the table, snapshots of the cruise, people smiling, the sea sparkling, proof of her existence, proof of her reality. I forced a smile, excused myself, and walked straight to the second cabin. When I knocked, she opened as always, silent, waiting. But this time the room wasn't empty. The red suitcase sat on the bed. I knew I'd seen it earlier in the first cabin, tucked beneath her bunk. My head spun. I whispered, "Who are you?" She raised her hand slowly, palm flat, as if to touch my chest, but stopped inches away. Then she closed the door gently, without breaking her stare. The purser demanded I drop it. He said passengers gossip enough without crew fueling rumors. I wanted to obey, but my own sanity was eroding. Every time I blinked, I saw both of her. One vibrant, one silent, bleeding into each other until I didn't trust my own eyes. On the final night, before docking, I made one last round. I saw the lively one dancing in the lounge. I forced myself to watch her feet touch the ground, her hands clap with the music, her voice call out with joy. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement at the far end of the lounge. The silent one stood by the doorway, motionless, watching. No one else seemed to notice her. I blinked, and the lively one paused, mid-dance, staring back at me with a frozen smile. For a breathless moment, I thought they would merge, collapse into one figure. But then the music swelled, people laughed, and the lively one spun again. The silent one was gone. When we docked in La Spezia again, both cabins were cleared. The first had her photographs, her clothes, her suitcase. She checked out, smiling, waving to the crew. The second was completely empty, as if no one had ever entered. No suitcase, no sheets disturbed, no trace of use. I searched it twice, sweating, refusing to believe it could be so pristine. The purser said nothing. The manifest for that voyage, when filed, had only one cabin listed under her name. I left the ship after that contract. I couldn't reconcile it. I still see her sometimes when I close my eyes, the smile of the woman alive, and the silence of the other, who only whispered once. And I never forgot her question. Which one? I've come to believe that both were real in their own way. One was the life she lived, smiling, laughing, carrying her suitcase and photographs. The other was everything she left behind. The stillness, the silence, the double marked on paper. The ship carried both. And I was cursed to witness it. If I learned anything, it's this: not every passenger who boards a ship leaves it in the same way. Some leave memories, some leave shadows. And sometimes those shadows take form, demanding to be seen. I just wish I never opened that second door, because now I carry her with me, alive and silent, every day. Story number 10. I leaned over the railing, trying to spot him before anyone else did. Mark had always been reckless, but sneaking into the ship's pool after curfew was a new level of stupid. I'd followed him that night because I didn't trust him not to get caught. He was 17, full of that restless energy that makes you feel invincible. I was just a year older, and maybe that was enough to feel the weight of consequences more heavily. I watched him slip barefoot across the slick deck tiles, a towel draped around his neck like a cape, and he grinned back at me before climbing the ladder and diving headfirst into the pool with barely a splash. At first, I laughed quietly to myself. The pool's surface shimmered with his movements, rippling under the deck lights, his head bobbing up as he paddled lazily from one end to the other. I whispered for him to hurry, to finish his little rebellion before the night guard walked past. He just waved me off, dunked under the water, and came up smiling, his hair plastered to his forehead. A couple walking by on the other side of the deck glanced our way, the woman shaking her head but smirking, clearly amused by the sight of a boy defying the rules. I felt a little relieved, thinking at least someone else had seen him, proof he was really there. Then he started showing off. He swam laps, kicked hard off the wall, and floated on his back like he owned the place. I crouched lower behind a row of chairs, torn between admiration and dread. My chest tightened when I spotted a security guard near the corner of the deck. I hissed Mark's name, but he either didn't hear me or didn't care. The guard's radio crackled as he passed by, his flashlight beam sweeping lazily across the floor. Somehow, impossibly, it didn't land on Mark. The pool was right there, water disturbed, droplets catching the light, but the guard's gaze slid over it as if it were calm and empty. I froze, afraid to move or call out. When the guard left, I rushed to the edge, crouching down to whisper harshly, "You're insane, get out now!" Mark turned onto his stomach, treading water, and smirked at me. "Relax, I'm fine," he said, loud enough to make me wince. His voice echoed strangely, thin and hollow, as though the sound was coming from the tiled walls instead of his mouth. He ducked beneath the surface again, and that was the last moment I saw him. The water rippled, spread outward, then stilled. I waited, counting seconds, expecting him to pop up at the far end. He was a strong swimmer, competitive, the kind of guy who liked to hold his breath longer than anyone else just to win. But when I hit 30 seconds, my nerves sparked sharp panic. I whispered his name, then called it louder. Still nothing. I scanned the pool, every inch of it reflecting empty, glistening water. My stomach twisted with dread. I kicked off my shoes and jumped in, plunging down into the chlorine sting, my arms sweeping desperately through the clear blue. There was no trace of him. I came up gasping, heart hammering, and screamed his name again. Footsteps approached quickly behind me, and the same couple from before stood there, wide-eyed. "Was someone in there?" the man asked. "We saw a boy earlier." Relief flashed for a second. At least I wasn't imagining this. But it dissolved instantly when I realized they weren't seeing him now either. I clawed at the water, diving again, scraping my hands along the tiled floor, pulling myself back up with lungs burning. Still nothing. Security arrived moments later, 3 men in uniform shining lights into the pool, demanding explanations. I sputtered, choking on words, telling them my friend had been swimming, that people had seen him. One of them glanced at the couple, but they both hesitated, exchanging a look before quietly admitting, yes, they'd seen someone earlier. That should have been enough. It should have made them act, but instead they radioed something I couldn't catch and motioned for me to get out of the water. I obeyed, shivering, my skin stinging with chlorine, my heart refusing to calm down. They replayed the security footage within the hour. I was there when they invited me into a cramped little office with humming monitors. My hands shook as they cued the tape, fast-forwarding until the time I'd seen Mark jump in. I pressed forward, pointing. "That's it, right there!" But on the screen, the pool lay still. I was crouched behind the chairs, just like I remembered, my body tense, but the water was glassy calm. No splashes, no movement, no figure. It looked like I was hiding from nothing. My throat closed as if I couldn't swallow air. "That's wrong," I stammered. "He was there. You saw the wet tiles, his flip-flops." One guard frowned, arms crossed, skeptical. Another left the room, only to return carrying the very sandals I had seen Mark kick off. They were damp, one strap bent, sitting in a plastic evidence bag. "These were found on the deck," the guard said flatly. "No sign of anyone else." I insisted again and again that the video was lying, that it didn't match reality, but my words sounded weak even to my own ears. They told me to rest, that maybe I was overtired, maybe confused. I wanted to scream at them, to grab the monitor and smash it until the truth appeared, but my voice cracked and faltered. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the ship sounded like a splash, every murmur in the hallway like Mark calling faintly from underwater. I sat by the window, staring out at endless black sea, imagining him drifting just below the surface, knocking against the hull, begging to be pulled back. My chest felt crushed by guilt, replaying the moment I told him to get out, the grin on his face, his head ducking beneath the surface for the last time. I should have jumped in sooner. I should have dragged him out, rules be damned. Morning brought no answers. His name was called over the intercom, asked to report to the desk. His belongings were searched, his bed untouched. Passengers whispered, speculating about stowaways, about foolish kids slipping overboard. The couple who had seen him avoided me now, their eyes heavy with unease, as though afraid agreeing with me again would make them complicit. The crew offered vague reassurances, promising investigations, but I felt the weight of disbelief pressing harder with every passing hour. 2 days later, I found something that made my blood run cold. I was walking past the pool, empty and roped off now, when I noticed faint streaks along the tiles at the shallow end. I crouched down and touched them. They were scuff marks, like toes scraping desperately against the surface. My heart pounded. I traced the lines, imagining him kicking, pushing, fighting to break free of something I couldn't see. I wanted to scream, but the sound stuck in my throat like a swallowed stone. I tried to show the marks to a crew member, but by the time I returned with someone else, the tiles were spotless, gleaming under fresh polish. The evidence erased. I felt madness creeping in, the line between memory and reality fraying. Maybe that was what the ship wanted, for me to doubt myself, to quiet down, to let it be forgotten. But I couldn't. Not when I still heard faint echoes at night, the splash of water against tile, the ripple of unseen movement, and sometimes, I swear, the sound of Mark's voice calling my name, muffled, distant, begging me not to leave him. When we finally docked in Split, I disembarked, shaking, clutching his flip-flops like a lifeline. I gave them to his parents with trembling hands, unable to look them in the eye. They searched my face for answers I didn't have, waiting for me to say the words that could make sense of their son's absence. But all I could manage was the truth as I knew it, that I saw him, that he swam, that he vanished, and that the ship itself seemed determined to erase him. Years have passed since then, but the memory clings to me like the sting of chlorine in my throat. Sometimes I dream of water closing over my head, of silence pressing in while my lungs burn, of flip-flops bobbing to the surface while everything else sinks. And sometimes, when I wake gasping, I wonder if the ship claimed him not by accident, but by design. If some spaces aren't meant for us to trespass, if the sea keeps secrets the way it swallows lives. And I keep thinking about that grin, the last thing I saw before he slipped beneath the water. Carefree, fearless, almost daring me to follow. I wish I had, because the truth is, no matter how much time has passed, part of me is still there on that deck in 1987, staring into the empty pool, waiting for him to come up for air that never came. That's the end of our 10 cruise ship horror stories. Which one haunted you the most? If you made it all the way, drop "The seas are watching" in the comments. And remember, on the open ocean, there's nowhere to run.